moment Sarah's name echoed through the crowded stadium, she looked toward the front row, expecting to see her parents cheering, but instead she saw them passing a glossy, gold-trimmed envelope to her younger brother, the exact envelope that held her entire future. The stadium was completely packed. Thousands of voices were cheering, shouting, and celebrating. Bright lights cut through the massive room, and the heavy smell of expensive flower arrangements hung in the air. Every single person sitting on those rows of plastic chairs had spent 4 long years working toward this exact moment. Sarah stood in line, her black graduation gown feeling unusually heavy against her shoulders. Her heart beat rapidly against her ribs. She was just 3 steps away from the stage. 3 steps away from the degree she had stayed up until 3 in the morning for, night after night, while working 2 part-time jobs just to keep gas in her car. Then, the speaker spoke into the microphone. Her name filled the entire arena. Sarah smiled, stepping forward onto the polished wooden stage. She reached out her hand to take the leather folder, but as she gripped it, her eyes instinctively drifted out into the sea of faces, searching for the 2 people who were supposed to be her biggest supporters. She found them. Row 4, seats 12 and 13. But Richard and Eleanor weren't looking at the stage. They weren't holding up cameras. They weren't clapping. Instead, Sarah's mother was leaning over, pushing a thick, ornate, cream-colored envelope into the hands of Sarah's 18-year-old brother, Leo. Richard, her father, was clapping Leo on the back, a massive, proud grin spreading across his face. Sarah's feet went completely cold right there on the stage. She almost stumbled over her own gown. That envelope was unmistakable. It was the official document from the trust fund bank, the one that held $85,000. The money her late grandmother had set aside specifically for Sarah's medical school tuition. Why was Leo holding it? Why were her parents looking at him like he had just conquered the world, while their only daughter was standing on a stage graduating magna cum laude without a single glance from them? Have you ever trusted the people who raised you so completely, only to realize you were just a shadow in your own home? Have you ever known, with total certainty, that the people who brought you into this world would gladly trade your future just to make someone else's path a little easier? Sarah walked off that stage, the applause fading into a dull roar in her ears. She looked down at her empty hands, then back at her family. The true betrayal hadn't even begun yet. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning. Growing up, Sarah was always the dependable one. In the quiet, tree-lined suburbs where the family lived, their 2-story house always looked perfect from the outside. The lawn was perfectly mowed, the windows were spotless, and the family photos on the mantel showed 4 people smiling brightly. But inside those walls, the rules were very different depending on who you were. Sarah learned very early that her role in the household was to be invisible but perfect. If she got an A- on a spelling test in the 5th grade, Richard would look over the top of his newspaper, sigh deeply, and ask why she hadn't secured the top spot in the class. Eleanor would immediately follow up by listing all the chores Sarah had missed while studying. There was no room for error. She was the oldest, so she had to carry the weight. Then there was Leo. Leo was 2 years younger, born with a smile that seemed to excuse him from every mistake he ever made. When Leo broke the neighbor's window with a baseball, Richard laughed it off, calling it boys being boys, and paid for the glass without a second thought. When Leo brought home a report card filled with failing marks, Eleanor would bake his favorite chocolate chip cookies and tell him that the school system simply didn't understand his creative mind. Sarah never complained. She truly loved her brother, and she rationalized her parents' harshness as a form of tough love. They just wanted her to succeed, she told herself. They knew she was strong enough to handle the pressure. By the time Sarah reached high school, her daily routine was exhausting. She woke up at 5 in the morning to review her notes for advanced placement classes. After school, she didn't go to parties or hang out at the mall. She drove straight to a local diner where she worked 4-hour shifts as a hostess, greeting customers with a tired smile. Every dollar she earned went directly into a small savings account she had opened herself. She bought her own clothes, paid for her own school supplies, and eventually bought a battered, 10-year-old sedan that rattled every time she turned the key. Her parents never offered to help with her expenses. "It builds character, Sarah," Richard would say during dinner, cutting his steak without looking at her. "A real leader learns the value of a dollar early in life. We expect great things from you." But while Sarah was building character by scrubbing tables and studying under the dim light of her desk lamp, Leo was living a completely different reality. For his 16th birthday, Richard and Eleanor didn't suggest he get a job. Instead, they surprised him in the driveway with a brand new metallic blue sports car. Sarah stood on the front porch, watching her brother rev the engine while her parents cheered. She remembered looking down at her own shoes, wondering why her character needed building. but Leo's didn't. Still, Sarah had one great comfort that kept her going through the long nights and the endless fatigue. Her grandmother, Evelyn, had been the only person in the family who truly saw her. Evelyn was a sharp, independent woman who had worked as a nurse for 40 years. Whenever she visited, she would sit with Sarah in the quiet of the backyard, holding her hands and listening to her dreams of becoming a pediatrician. Before Evelyn passed away during Sarah's sophomore year of high school, she called Sarah to her bedside. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were incredibly clear. "Sarah," her grandmother had whispered, pressing a small, old silver ring into her palm. "Your parents are blinded by their own expectations, but I see you. I see how hard you work. I have set aside a trust fund, $85,000. It is with the estate bank. The day you graduate from college, that money becomes yours to pay for your medical school. Don't let anyone take your dream away." Those words became Sarah's anchor. Every time she wanted to quit, every time her parents ignored her achievements to celebrate Leo simply waking up on time, she thought of Grandma Evelyn. She knew her future was secure. She didn't need her parents' praise because she had a path forward, carved out by someone who truly loved her. When college acceptance letters arrived, Sarah was accepted into a highly competitive pre-med program at a prestigious state university. When she showed the acceptance letter to Eleanor at the kitchen island, her mother didn't look up from her tablet. "That's nice, dear," Eleanor said, scrolling through a clothing website. "Make sure you don't expect us to pay for the housing. We have to save our resources. Leo is looking at some very exclusive private academies for his future, and they are not cheap." Sarah felt a familiar sting, but she pushed it down. "I know, Mom. I have my savings for housing, and Grandma's trust will cover my tuition later. I'm completely independent." "Good," Eleanor murmured. "That's exactly how it should be." And so, Sarah packed her life into 4 cardboard boxes, loaded them into her rattling sedan, and drove away to college. For 4 years, she lived on instant noodles and black coffee. She took on a second job at the university library, working the graveyard shift. While her roommates went on spring break trips to tropical beaches, Sarah volunteered at the local clinic, gaining clinical hours and building a flawless resume for medical school applications. Her parents rarely called. When they did, the conversation was always about Leo. Leo had joined a fraternity. Leo had traveled to Europe for a summer. Leo needed a new laptop because he dropped his old one in the pool. Sarah would listen patiently, her heart aching for just one question about her own life, her own exams, her own struggles. But the question never came. What nobody knew at the time was that Sarah's silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. She was willing to endure the neglect because she believed the finish line was just ahead. She believed that on her graduation day, the legal documents would be signed, the trust fund would unlock, and she would finally step into the life she had earned with her own sweat and tears. But as her senior year wound down, a strange shift occurred in the family dynamic. 2 weeks before graduation, Eleanor called Sarah out of the blue. Her tone wasn't its usual cold, indifferent self. It was cheerful, almost overly sweet. "Sarah, sweetie," Eleanor said over the line, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "We are so incredibly proud of you. A college graduate, we've already booked a beautiful private room at that upscale Italian restaurant downtown for after the ceremony. We want the whole family there to celebrate a massive milestone." Sarah sat on her small college bed, completely taken aback. For a brief moment, her eyes filled with warmth. Had they finally realized how much she had achieved? Did they finally see her? "Thank you, Mom," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. "That means so much to me. I can't wait to see you guys." "Of course," Eleanor said smoothly. "And make sure you wear something really nice. It's going to be a very big day for our family, a day none of us will ever forget." Sarah hung up the phone, a small smile playing on her lips. For the first time in 4 years, she felt a glimmer of hope that her family might actually become the supportive unit she had always craved. She spent the next weekend looking for the perfect dress, settling on a simple white silk gown that made her feel elegant and professional. What happened next shocked everyone. The morning of graduation was bright and cloudless. The university campus was alive with energy. As Sarah walked out of her apartment, she felt a deep sense of pride. She had done it. She had survived the sleepless nights, the grueling exams, and the crushing loneliness. She met her parents and Leo outside the stadium before the ceremony. Richard looked sharp in a tailored suit, and Eleanor was wearing a bright designer dress. Leo stood next to them, looking bored, his eyes glued to his phone screen as he adjusted his expensive watch. Look at you, Eleanor said, stepping forward to give Sarah a quick, superficial hug that barely brushed her shoulders. You look very presentable, Sarah, doesn't she, Richard? Yes, excellent, Richard said, checking his own watch. We should get inside. The seating for families is filling up quickly, and I don't want to be stuck in the back rows. Sarah's smile faltered slightly. No, I love you. No, we are so proud of your grades. Just a comment on her appearance and a complaint about the seating, but she shook it off, telling herself that they were just stressed by the crowds. As they began walking toward the entrance, Sarah noticed her father carrying a thick, heavy leather briefcase. It was the one he used only for high-level business meetings or legal transactions. Dad, why did you bring your work briefcase to my graduation? Sarah asked, trying to keep her tone light and playful. Richard stopped, his posture instantly stiffening. He adjusted his grip on the handle, his knuckles turning slightly white. He exchanged a rapid, nervous glance with Eleanor before looking back at Sarah. It's just some important paperwork I need to take care of later today, Richard said, his voice flat and dismissive. Don't worry about it. Focus on your ceremony. Sarah frowned. There was a strange tension in his voice that didn't match the celebratory setting. She looked at Eleanor, who immediately began adjusting Sarah's graduation cap, deliberately breaking her eye contact. Go on, get in line with the other students, dear, Eleanor urged, pushing her gently toward the student entrance. We'll see you right after you walk across the stage. Sarah walked away, but a small, uneasy feeling began to take root in the pit of her stomach. There was something off about the way they were acting. It wasn't just their usual coldness. It was a strange, hyper-focused secrecy. Can you believe that parents could stand in front of their child on the most important day of her young life, carrying the very tools of her betrayal, and not feel a single shred of guilt? During the ceremony, Sarah tried to focus on the achievement. She listened to the speeches, but her mind kept drifting back to that briefcase. Why would her father bring legal documents to a graduation? And then came the moment on stage. The moment her name was called, the moment she looked down and saw her mother sliding that unmistakable, gold-trimmed trust fund envelope into Leo's hands, while her father beamed with pride. The realization didn't hit her all at once. It came in waves, freezing her blood. That envelope belonged to the estate bank. It was the exact design her grandmother had shown her in old paperwork before she died. It was the fund that was supposed to unlock today, for her. When the ceremony concluded and the graduates were dismissed, the crowd poured out onto the campus lawns. Sarah moved through the sea of people like a ghost, her eyes locked on the spot where she had agreed to meet her family. When she found them, Leo was already tucked into the back seat of her father's luxury SUV, staring at his phone with a smug, self-satisfied grin. Richard and Eleanor were standing by the doors, looking eager to leave. There you are, Eleanor said as Sarah approached. Hurry up, get in your car and follow us to the restaurant. We have a reservation to keep, and traffic is going to be terrible. Mom, Sarah said, her voice completely steady, but completely devoid of warmth. What was that envelope you gave Leo while I was on stage? The air between them instantly turned to ice. Eleanor's cheerful expression dropped away like a mask, replaced by a cold, defensive hardness. Richard stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of his wife. Sarah, this is not the time or the place for this discussion, Richard said, his voice lowering to a stern whisper. We are going to a public restaurant. We will enjoy our lunch, and we will talk about family finances later, at home. No, Sarah said, standing her ground, her heels digging into the hot pavement. We are going to talk about it right now. I saw you. That was Grandma Evelyn's trust envelope, the one meant for my medical school. Why did you give it to Leo? Eleanor let out a sharp, irritated sigh, rolling her eyes as if Sarah was being a dramatic, unreasonable child. Oh, for heaven's sake, Sarah, Eleanor snapped, her voice cutting like glass. Stop being so incredibly selfish for once in your life. Today is a big day for your brother, too. He just got accepted into an elite international business academy in Switzerland. The tuition is astronomical, and he needs the funds immediately to secure his spot. Sarah felt as though the ground beneath her feet had suddenly vanished. She stared at her mother, completely paralyzed. What do you mean he needs the funds? That money isn't yours to give. Grandma left that for me, for my tuition. I've worked myself to the bone for 4 years keeping my grades perfect because I knew that money was waiting to pay for my future. Richard's face darkened, his jaw clenching tightly. He leaned in closer, his voice laced with an intense, controlling authority. Listen to me very carefully, young lady. Rar. Richard whispered angrily. Your grandmother left that money under our legal management until you turned 24 or graduated. We had the full legal authority to direct those assets where they would benefit the family's future the most. You already have a degree. You are smart, you are capable, and you can easily take out student loans for your medical school. Leo needs this boost. He needs this head start in life. Loans? Sarah's voice cracked, a single wave of heat rising to her face before she forcefully suppressed it. You want me to take on hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt after I gave up everything to make sure I wouldn't have to? While Leo gets a free ride to Europe with money that was stolen from me? It was not stolen, Eleanor hissed, her eyes darting around to see if any nearby families were listening. We are a family, Sarah. We make decisions together for the collective good. Now, you will get into your car, you will drive to the restaurant, and you will behave like a civilized human being. We are not going to let your jealousy ruin this day. Sarah looked at her mother, then she looked at her father. She saw no remorse in their eyes, no guilt, no hesitation. They truly believed that her life, her hard work, and her dreams were completely expendable compared to their golden boy's desires. I'm not going to the restaurant, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. Sarah, do not do this, Richard warned, stepping closer, his briefcase gripped tightly in his right hand. If you walk away right now, if you cause a scene and disrespect this family today, there will be serious consequences. Do you understand me? But the worst was still to come. Sarah didn't say another word. She turned around, her black graduation gown billowing behind her, and walked straight toward her old, rattling sedan. Her parents shouted after her, their voices sharp with anger, but she didn't look back. She got into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely put the key into the ignition. She drove back to her tiny apartment, her mind spinning into a dark, chaotic void. The sheer weight of what they had done was crushing her. They hadn't just taken money, they had systematically stripped away the one safety net she had spent years relying on. They had completely disregarded her grandmother's dying wishes. As soon as she walked into her room, she threw her graduation cap onto the floor. She needed to know the full extent of what they had done. She grabbed her laptop and logged into the online portal of the estate bank. Because she was a named beneficiary, she still had view-only access to the trust's historical statements, even if her parents held the administrative keys. She opened the account history. Her fingers trembled on the trackpad. As she scrolled down through the digital statements, the true depth of the betrayal unfolded before her eyes. It was far worse than just a single transfer on graduation day. Her parents hadn't just moved the money today. They had been draining the trust for the past 2 entire years. Sarah stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting off her wide eyes. There was a withdrawal of $15,000 from 14 months ago, labeled educational expenses. Sarah remembered that exact month. That was when Leo had crashed his second sports car, and her parents had mysteriously upgraded him to a newer luxury model within a week. There was another withdrawal of $20,000 6 months later, labeled specialized training. That was the exact time Leo had dropped out of his community college courses to spend 3 months living in a luxury beachfront rental in California, claiming he was finding his entrepreneurial spirit. They had used Sarah's medical school fund as a personal piggy bank to fund Leo's lazy, reckless lifestyle. The envelope they had handed him on stage today wasn't the full $85,000. It was just the final remaining $30,000, the last scraps of her grandmother's legacy, handed over to pay for a European tuition deposit. The total balance left in the account was exactly $0.43. Sarah sat back in her chair, the air leaving her lungs completely. She felt an overwhelming sensation of suffocation. Every single night she had spent working at that diner, every exam she had taken with a pounding headache from exhaustion, every sacrifice she had made to keep her expenses low, it had all been a farce. Her parents had been actively stealing her future behind her back, laughing and celebrating with her brother while she starved herself to buy textbooks. Suddenly, her phone began to buzz violently on the desk. It was a text message from her father. Sarah picked it up. The message read, "Since you chose to throw a childish tantrum and skip the family dinner, we have made some decisions. We have paid for your apartment rent for the past 4 years through a family allowance account. Effective immediately, that account is closed. You have until the end of the week to vacate the apartment. If you cannot behave like a grateful member of this family, you will not receive a single dime of family support. Good luck with medical school." Sarah stared at the text. A family allowance account? That That was another lie. The apartment rent had been paid from an account that Sarah's grandmother had set aside separately for living expenses. An account that was also supposed to be hers. Her parents had seized control of everything, using it as a leash to keep her quiet and compliant. And now, because she dared to question their theft, they were throwing her out onto the street 4 days after graduation. She stood up, walking over to the small window of her apartment. She looked down at the street below. She had no money for a security deposit on a new place. She had no trust fund for medical school. Her applications were due in 2 months, and each application cost money she simply didn't have. She was completely trapped, stripped of her assets, her home, and her family in the span of less than 4 hours. She felt a hot, heavy wave of anger boiling deep within her chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. The sadness had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard, razor-sharp fury. They wanted to see her break. They wanted her to come crawling back to them on her knees, begging for forgiveness, accepting whatever crumbs they decided to throw her way, while Leo lived like royalty in Switzerland. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in a long time. It was the number of David Vance, her grandmother Evelyn's old attorney, the man who had drafted the original estate documents before her grandmother passed away. The phone rang 3 times before a deep, professional voice answered. David Vance speaking. David, Sarah said, her voice completely calm, all traces of shaking entirely gone. This is Sarah. I need your help. My parents just emptied Grandma Evelyn's trust fund for my brother, and they are evicting me from my apartment. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. Sarah could hear the sound of papers shifting. Sarah, David said, his tone dropping into a very serious, protective register. I have been waiting for this phone call. Your grandmother knew exactly what your parents were capable of. We need to schedule a meeting immediately. Bring every single document, every screenshot, and every bank statement you can access. And that's when Sarah made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, the sky was covered in thick, dark gray clouds, mirroring the heavy reality Sarah woke up to. She hadn't slept a single wink. Her small apartment was cluttered with half-packed cardboard boxes. Her entire life was reduced to a few stacks of clothes, textbooks, and old photographs. She felt a deep, physical ache in her chest, the kind of exhaustion that sleep could never fix. She was officially at the absolute bottom of her life, facing eviction with less than $200 left in her checking account. But as she sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the old silver ring her grandmother had given her, something inside her shifted. The heavy fog of despair began to evaporate, replaced by a crystalline, piercing clarity. She realized that her parents' biggest mistake wasn't just stealing the money, it was believing that the money was the only thing that made her strong. They thought that by stripping away her financial security, they could strip away her future. They forgot that she was the one who had survived the grueling 4 years of pre-med while maintaining a perfect grade point average. They forgot that she was the one who knew how to fight. At exactly 10 o'clock, Sarah walked into the law offices of David Vance. The building was located downtown, a sleek structure of glass and polished dark wood. David was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, surrounded by tall shelves filled with leather-bound legal volumes. He looked up, his expression a mixture of profound sympathy and fierce professional determination. Sit down, Sarah, David said, gesturing to a comfortable leather chair across from him. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the stack of documents Sarah had printed out, the bank statements showing the systematic draining of her trust over the past 2 years. I've reviewed the preliminary access logs you sent over last night. What your parents did is not just cruel, it is a flagrant violation of their fiduciary duty as designated trustees. Sarah leaned forward, her hands resting flat on the cool desk. They told me they had the full legal authority to direct the assets wherever they saw fit for the benefit of the family. My father was incredibly confident. David let out a sharp, cold chuckle that carried no warmth whatsoever. Your father is a businessman, Sarah, but he is not an estate lawyer. He read the standard template clauses regarding trustee discretion and assumed it gave him a blank check to fund his favorite child's luxurious lifestyle. What he completely ignored, or chose to overlook, is the explicit, ironclad restrictive covenant your grandmother insisted on adding to the final draft of the document. David pulled a thick, yellowed document from a manila folder and turned it toward Sarah, pointing his finger at a specific clause underlined in dark blue ink. Look right here, David explained, his voice sharp and precise. Section 4, paragraph B. It states explicitly that the funds held within this specific vehicle are strictly earmarked for your higher education, specifically graduate or medical school tuition and associated living expenses. Any disbursement of funds for individuals other than the named beneficiary, which is you, requires your explicit, written, notarized consent once you attain the age of majority. Furthermore, any unauthorized withdrawal constitutes a breach of trust under state probate law. Sarah read the words on the page. Her grandmother's signature sat at the bottom, firm and elegant. A profound wave of relief washed over her, followed immediately by a surge of intense empowerment. So, what they did is completely illegal? It is highly actionable, David corrected, a small calculating smile appearing on his lips. If we file a formal petite in probate court for a full accounting and a breach of fiduciary duty, the court will compel your parents to produce every single receipt, every invoice, and every bank record explaining exactly where that $85,000 went. When the judge sees that your grandmother's medical school fund was spent on European tuition deposits, sports car upgrades, and beach rentals for your brother, they will be ordered to repay every single cent to the trust out of their personal assets. Furthermore, the court can strip them of their trusteeship and appoint an independent fiduciary, or you, to manage the restored funds. Sarah sat back in the chair, a cold, calm confidence settling over her like armor. The time for crying was officially over. The time for begging her parents for a shred of decency or love was dead. She didn't need their permission to have a future. How long will a standard court battle take, David? Sarah asked quietly. Through normal channels, 6 to 9 months easily, David replied, his brow furrowing slightly. Your father would hire expensive corporate defense lawyers to delay the discovery process, trying to run out the clock and starve you out financially before you can even file your medical school applications. Sarah shook her head slowly, her eyes narrowing. No, I don't want to wait 9 months. My applications are due in 8 weeks. If I wait for the courts, I miss an entire cycle and they win the first round. I need them to settle this now. I need them to realize that keeping this a secret is going to cost them far more than $85,000. David leaned back, looking at her with a newfound sense of respect. What exactly do you have in mind, Sarah? My father is currently preparing for a major regional expansion of his consulting firm, Sarah said, her voice dropping into a chilly, analytical cadence. He is trying to secure a massive investment from a highly conservative venture capital group next month. His entire professional reputation is built on the public image of absolute integrity, family values, and pristine financial management. If the community and his potential investors find out that he is a fraudulent trustee who stole a dead grandmother's money from his own daughter to fund a spoiled son's lifestyle, his entire expansion will collapse overnight. She looked at David, her expression unreadable but intensely determined. I don't just want to file a lawsuit in a quiet courtroom. I want them to know that I am holding the match that can burn down everything they've built. I want a silent blueprint that forces them to sign over what they owe me before they even know what hit them. What Sarah did next, nobody saw coming. 3 days later, the atmosphere inside the upscale Italian restaurant downtown was humming with the quiet chatter of wealthy patrons. Soft jazz music played from the hidden ceiling speakers, and the scent of truff, oil and fresh herbs filled the air. Richard and Eleanor were sitting at a prime corner table, celebrating with Leo, who was loudly bragging about the luxury student apartment he was looking at renting in Geneva. The location is absolutely prime, Dad, Leo said, gesturing wildly with his fork. It's right near the lake. All the top-tier international students live there. It's going to be incredible for my networking opportunities. Of course, son, Richard smiled, sipping his expensive red wine. Only the best for you. We want to ensure you have every single advantage when you start your courses next month. Suddenly, the heavy velvet curtain of the private dining area was pulled back. Sarah stepped into the room. She wasn't wearing her casual college clothes, nor was she wearing her graduation gown. She was dressed in a sharp-tailored dark charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back tightly, her eyes completely devoid of any familial warmth. She looked like an auditor arriving to shut down a fraudulent operation. Eleanor's smile instantly vanished, her face tightening with intense irritation. Sarah, what on earth are you doing here? I thought we made it very clear that your presence wasn't welcome until you decided to apologize for your disgusting behavior at the graduation ceremony. Sarah didn't say a single word. She walked over to the table with a slow, deliberate pace that commanded the room. She stood at the head of the table, looking down at her parents and her brother. The silence stretching between them was heavy and suffocating. Nobody in that room said a word for 10 full seconds. Then, Sarah reached into her leather folder and pulled out 3 identical, thick white paper packets. With a smooth, precise motion, she dropped one in front of Richard, one in front of Eleanor, and one in front of Leo. "What is the meaning of this childish nonsense?" Richard demanded, his voice rising in anger as he looked down at the documents. He picked up the packet, his eyes scanning the first page. The bold legal header read, "Formal demand for comprehensive accounting and notice of intent to file petition for breach of fiduciary duty and civil fraud." Attached to the back of the legal document were high-resolution screenshots of the trust fund's transaction history, with every single unauthorized withdrawal highlighted in bright yellow ink, alongside copies of Grandma Evelyn's original restrictive covenants. Richard's face instantly drained of all color. The confident, wealthy businessman vanished, replaced by a man who had just looked into the barrel of a loaded gun. His hands began to shake so violently that the papers rattled in his grip. "Sarah, what have you done?" Richard whispered, his voice cracking, his eyes darting around the restaurant as if checking for hidden cameras. "That packet is a formal legal demand," Sarah said, her voice carrying a terrifyingly calm resonant authority that filled the private dining alcove. "David Vance has already drafted the complete civil petition. It details every single dollar you illegally embezzled from Grandma Evelyn's educational trust fund over the past 24 months to fund Leo's lifestyle. It proves fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of assets." Eleanor slammed her wine glass down onto the white tablecloth, spilling dark red liquid across the pristine fabric. "How dare you? We are your parents. We did what was best for this family. You cannot sue your own flesh and blood over a few dollars." "It isn't a few dollars, Mom," Sarah replied, her gaze freezing Eleanor in place. "It is $85,000 of legally protected trust assets. And I'm not just suing you in a probate court." Sarah leaned down, placing both hands firmly on the table, looking directly into her father's panicked eyes. "Dad, I know all about your upcoming expansion meeting next Tuesday with the Vanguard Investment Group. I know that they require a comprehensive background check and a disclosure of any pending material litigation or fraud allegations before they sign the $10 million funding agreement." She let out a short, cold, humorless laugh. "If this petition is filed with the county clerk on Monday morning at 9 o'clock, it becomes a matter of public record. A copy of the stamped filing will be hand-delivered to the managing director of Vanguard by 10 o'clock. By 11 o'clock, your expansion plan will be completely dead. Your professional reputation will be utterly destroyed, and your firm's current clients will be canceling their contracts before lunch." Richard stood up so fast his chair screeched loudly against the marble floor. "Sarah, please, stop this. This is absolute madness. You will ruin us. You will ruin this entire family. You didn't care about ruining my life when you left me with 43 cents in my account and gave me 4 days to vacate my apartment," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut deeper than any shout. "You didn't care about family when you stole the one thing my grandmother left to protect my future." Leo looked up from his packet, finally realizing the severity of the situation. "Wait, Dad. If she does this, what happens to my tuition for Switzerland? What happens to my apartment?" "Shut up, Leo," Richard snapped, his composure completely fracturing as he rubbed his temples, sweat visibly breaking out across his forehead. He looked at Sarah, his eyes pleading. A broken man, realizing he had completely underestimated the daughter he had spent a lifetime ignoring. "What do you want, Sarah? Name your terms." Sarah pulled a single legal document from her folder, a pre-drafted, binding settlement agreement and immediate asset transfer authorization. "You will sign this document right now," Sarah commanded, sliding a H8 black pen across the table. "It authorizes an immediate, non-revocable wire transfer of $85,000 from your personal investment account into a brand new, independent educational trust account managed solely by David Vance's firm. Furthermore, it includes a signed waiver relinquishing any and all parental authority or administrative control over my remaining assets, including the apartment lease, which you will prepay for the next 12 months as compensation for the distress you caused." Richard stared at the pen. He looked at his wife, whose mouth was wide open in silent, paralyzed shock. He looked at the evidence of his fraud staring back at him from the highlighted pages. He knew he had 0 cards left to play. If he fought, he lost his multi-million-dollar business expansion and faced public disgrace. If he signed, he lost the money he had stolen. With a trembling hand, Richard picked up the pen. He signed his name on the dotted line. He passed the document to Eleanor, who signed it with tears of pure rage streaming down her face, refusing to look Sarah in the eyes. Sarah picked up the signed document, checking the signatures with a cold, professional eye. She slipped it securely into her folder. She looked at her family one last time, the people who had spent 18 years making her feel small, invisible, and worthless. And then she smiled. That was the moment they lost. But the story wasn't over yet. The next morning, the wire transfer cleared. The $85,000 was safely sitting in an ironclad account that her parents could never touch, see, or influence again. Sarah sat in her apartment, looking out at the morning sun finally breaking through the heavy clouds. For the first time in her life, the crushing weight of anxiety was gone. She felt incredibly light, as if she could finally breathe after being submerged underwater for 22 years. The real consequences for her family began to unfold almost immediately, because Richard had to pull $85,000 of liquid cash out of his personal accounts overnight to avoid the lawsuit. His personal liquidity took a massive hit. When the Vanguard Investment Group conducted their deep financial audit the following week, they noticed the sudden, unexplained movement of large capital assets and the abrupt changes in his personal portfolio. Sensing instability and a lack of transparency, the investment group quietly pulled out of the expansion deal entirely. Richard's dream of expanding his firm collapsed before it even started. The financial strain forced him to downsize his current operations, moving his offices out of the prestigious downtown high-rise and back into a modest suburban complex. The aura of untouchable success he had spent decades cultivating was permanently fractured. Leo's lavish future evaporated just as quickly. Without the stolen trust fund money to pay for the exorbitant tuition and luxury living expenses in Switzerland, his enrollment at the elite international academy was summarily cancelled. He didn't get to go to Geneva. He didn't get a luxury lakeside apartment. Instead, he was forced to enroll in a local community college, driving his older sports car to classes while living in his childhood bedroom under the strict, stressful eye of his now impoverished parents. The golden boy was finally forced to face the reality of hard work, and he was completely unprepared for it. Sarah never went back to that house. She didn't block their numbers. She simply didn't need to. They stopped calling because they were terrified of her. They finally realized that the quiet, compliant girl they had spent years taking advantage of was gone forever, replaced by a formidable woman who knew exactly how to protect herself. 6 weeks later, Sarah received an email that made her hands shake for a completely different reason. It was an official acceptance letter from her top-choice medical school, complete with a full tuition scholarship offer for her first year based on her exemplary academic record and clinical volunteer hours. Her grandmother's trust fund would easily cover her remaining years, her books, and her living expenses, leaving her completely debt-free upon graduation. She walked out onto her balcony, holding a warm cup of coffee, feeling a profound sense of peace. She realized that the greatest victory wasn't the money she had won back, or the justice she had executed so perfectly. The true victory was that she had broken the cycle of her family's psychological control. She had proven to herself that her worth was never defined by how much she could sacrifice for people who didn't appreciate her. She was free. The ultimate lesson of this story is that the people who think they can use your silence as a stepping stone will always end up tripping over the boundaries you finally decide to build. Now I want to ask you 2 very important questions directly. First, do you think what Sarah's parents did by draining her dead grandmother's trust fund was completely unforgivable, or do you believe family decisions should always override individual promises? Second, has someone in your own family ever stolen an opportunity, an inheritance, or a dream from you just to hand it to a sibling who didn't earn it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If this story reminded you that your future is always worth fighting for, please take a moment to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another unbelievable story of justice and truth. Thank you for listening, and remember, never let anyone, not even the people who raised you, take your dream away.